The warning came at 3:47 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time when every telescope on Earth suddenly went blind. Not broken, just blocked. Something massive had appeared between Earth and the stars. By dawn, everyone knew. The ships hung there like dark monuments against the sun, blotting out constellations that had guided human sailors for thousands of years. 47 vessels, each one larger than Manhattan, arranged in a perfect grid above the planet. They did not fire. They did not move. They simply waited as if their presence alone should be enough to make humanity kneel. Grand Admiral Tulvin studied Earth through the observation window of his flagship. The planet looked fragile from orbit, wrapped in thin blue atmosphere covered mostly in water. His species had conquered 847 worlds across the galaxy. This would be 848. The scans showed primitive satellites, basic rocket technology, and nothing that resembled proper military capability. They had not even colonized their own moon permanently. It would be over quickly. "Broadcast the terms," Tulvin ordered. Across Earth, every screen, every radio, every device capable of receiving a signal suddenly displayed the same message in 47 languages. The message was simple: surrender within 72 hours or face complete destruction. Integrate into the Demarian Empire as a subject species. Resistance would be met with the obliteration of major population centers. They had 3 days to decide. General Rebecca Hayes stood in the United Earth Defense Command Center, deep beneath the Swiss Alps. The room buzzed with activity as military officers from every nation tried to coordinate a response. The screens showed footage of the alien fleet. They showed panicked crowds in cities worldwide. They showed the same message repeating endlessly. "What do we have that can touch them?" she asked her tactical officer. "Nothing confirmed, ma'am. Our best missiles might reach orbit, but their ships have energy shields. Every test we have run shows conventional weapons are useless." Hayes nodded slowly. She had expected this answer. The aliens had faster-than-light travel. They had energy weapons. They had conquered hundreds of worlds. Of course, conventional weapons would not work. "Then we move to unconventional options," she said quietly. 12 hours into the invasion countdown, the first alien strike ships descended through Earth's atmosphere. They were smaller craft, sleek and dark, that peeled away from the main fleet and dropped toward the surface. Tulvin had ordered a demonstration of force. Show the humans what resistance would cost them. The strike ships selected military bases on 3 continents and opened fire. The plasma beams burned white-hot as they lanced down from the sky. An Air Force base in Nevada simply ceased to exist, replaced by a crater of molten glass. A naval shipyard in China vanished in seconds. A military command post in Germany collapsed into rubble. The aliens destroyed only military targets, carefully avoiding civilian casualties. This was a demonstration, not a massacre. Not yet. Human forces scrambled to respond. Fighter jets launched, firing missiles that exploded harmlessly against alien energy shields. Anti-aircraft batteries opened up, their shells bouncing off invisible barriers. Tanks fired round after round that simply dissipated before impact. The aliens did not even bother to shoot back. They hovered over the burning ruins of human military installations, untouchable and absolute in their superiority. News footage spread across the planet within minutes. Humans watched their most advanced weapons fail completely against the invaders. Some called for immediate surrender. Others demanded resistance at any cost. Governments argued while their military bases burned. The 72-hour countdown continued. Dr. Anton Petrov sat in his laboratory in Moscow, watching the news coverage with growing concern. He was a biologist, not a soldier, but he understood what was happening. The aliens were not trying to kill humans. They were trying to break human will. They wanted surrender, not genocide. That meant they thought humans were worth keeping alive. It also meant they had made a critical assumption about how humans would react to overwhelming force. They assumed fear would lead to submission. They did not understand that fear could also lead to fury. By hour 24, alien ground forces had established 3 beachheads on Earth. They landed in remote areas, away from major cities, and began setting up bases of operation. The soldiers that emerged from the landing craft stood 7 feet tall, with gray skin and eyes that seemed too large for their faces. They wore dark armor that shimmered with energy fields and carried weapons that hummed with barely contained power. Local military forces attempted to engage them and were crushed easily. The aliens moved with practiced efficiency, establishing perimeter defenses and fortified positions. They had done this hundreds of times before on hundreds of worlds. The operation proceeded exactly according to Demarian military doctrine. What they did not notice was that the humans had already evacuated everything valuable from the areas they occupied. What they did not see was that the humans left traps behind. Simple traps, primitive traps, explosives rigged to doors and windows, tripwires connected to grenades, buildings wired to collapse. 3 Demarian soldiers died in the first hour of occupation when a booby-trap generator exploded. It was a crude device, chemical explosives packed around a fuel source, but it worked. The aliens had shields that stopped energy weapons and projectiles. No one had programmed the shields to stop building fragments from a structural collapse. The deaths barely registered in the overall invasion statistics, 3 soldiers out of thousands. Tulvin did not even read the casualty report. He was focused on the countdown. 48 hours remained until the deadline. Then the real bombardment would begin. In her command center, Hayes received the report about the alien casualties. 3 enemy soldiers dead from improvised traps. It was nothing compared to the thousands of humans already killed, but it proved something important. They could bleed, and if they could bleed, they could die. She pulled up classified files that had been sealed since the end of the Cold War. Plans and protocols that nations had developed to fight enemies with superior technology. Weapons that had been built to destroy bunkers, cities, and entire countries. Weapons that had never been used because the cost was too terrible to imagine. The cost was about to become acceptable. 48 hours into the occupation, Tulvin made his first inspection of conquered territory. His transport descended through Earth's atmosphere toward the military base they had seized in North America. From the air, it looked secure. Demarian forces controlled a 20-mile radius, their shields creating a visible dome of energy over the installation. Everything appeared to be proceeding according to plan. The moment his boots touched Earth soil, Tulvin felt something was wrong. The base was too empty, not just evacuated but stripped. Every piece of equipment, every vehicle, every scrap of useful material had been removed. The humans had not fled in panic. They had conducted an organized withdrawal, taking everything they could carry and destroying what they could not. His security detail led him through the facility. Empty hangars gaped like missing teeth. Fuel depots had been drained and contaminated. Even the food in the storage areas was gone. The humans had left behind empty buildings and corpses in uniform. Upon inspection, the bodies turned out to be mannequins dressed in military gear, positioned to look like casualties from orbit scans. "They mocked us," his second-in-command said quietly. Before Tulvin could respond, the explosion hit. A delayed charge buried beneath the main administrative building detonated, sending debris and flames erupting upward. 3 more soldiers died, their shields overwhelmed by the sheer mass of concrete and steel falling on them. The humans had wired their own base to collapse after occupation. Tulvin felt something he had not experienced in 300 years of military service. Not fear, exactly. Unease. These humans were supposed to be primitive. They were supposed to be terrified. Instead, they were fighting back with a viciousness that suggested they did not understand they had already lost. Back on the flagship, Demarian intelligence officers gathered reports from across the invasion zones. What they read disturbed them deeply. They had accessed human computer networks and begun downloading cultural and historical data. The analyst teams were trying to understand the species they had invaded. One officer pulled up military records, conflicts stretching back thousands of years, wars fought with bronze weapons, then iron, then gunpowder, then chemical agents, then nuclear fire. Humans had been killing each other continuously throughout their entire recorded history. They had developed weapons specifically to murder their own kind in the most efficient ways possible. The officer's hands trembled as she read about World War II. 50 million dead in 6 years. Cities erased by firebombing. Entire populations exterminated in industrial killing facilities. Nuclear weapons deployed against civilian targets. The humans had done this to each other. "Sir," she said to her commander, "I think we made a mistake." "Explain." "The humans. They have more words for war than we have for peace. Their entire civilization is built on organized violence. Every major technological advancement they have made was first weaponized. They split the atom and immediately built bombs with it. They developed flight and created fighter aircraft. They invented computers and used them to target missiles." The commander dismissed her concerns. "That proves they are dangerous to each other, not to us. We have superior technology." "But sir, they have doctrine for fighting superior technology. They call it guerrilla warfare, asymmetric warfare, resistance operations. They have entire military philosophies built around how to defeat enemies with better weapons." The report was filed and ignored. Tulvin had 847 successful conquests behind him. He would not be deterred by human creativity with primitive explosives. Across occupied territories, Demarian casualties began mounting. Snipers took shots from impossible distances, killing aliens through gaps in their energy shields before disappearing into civilian populations. Improvised explosive devices detonated under patrol vehicles. Poison appeared in water supplies. Biological agents sickened alien soldiers with diseases engineered to attack their specific physiology. The humans were not fighting like a defeated species. They were fighting like they had a chance of winning. Dr. Petrov worked around the clock in his laboratory, analyzing samples of Demarian biology obtained from the casualties. Blood, tissue, genetic material. He studied their cellular structure, their immune responses, their vulnerabilities. What he found was disturbing. The Demarians were vulnerable to dozens of Earth pathogens. Their immune systems had evolved on worlds with lower microbial diversity. They had conquered species across the galaxy, but those species had different biochemistry, different diseases. Earth was a petri dish of biological warfare agents, and the Demarians had just climbed inside. He began development of weaponized strains, viruses modified to attack Demarian neural tissue, bacteria engineered to consume their blood cells, toxins that would pass through their shields like they did not exist. The work made him sick, but he continued. His family had died in the first bombardment. He had lost his wife and daughter to a demonstration of alien power. Now he would demonstrate human power. Underground resistance networks coordinated attacks across the globe. Former soldiers, civilians, teenagers, grandparents. Anyone who could hold a weapon joined the fight. They had no central command, no unified strategy. They simply attacked any alien target they could reach and then melted back into the population. Demarian forces responded with increasing brutality. They began executing civilians in reprisal for resistance attacks. For every alien killed, 10 humans died. The ratio climbed to 50 to 1, then 100 to 1. The humans did not stop fighting. If anything, the executions made them more determined. A captured Demarian officer sat in an underground bunker, being interrogated by resistance fighters. They had treated his wounds, given him food and water, and now they asked him questions about fleet deployments and defensive positions. He was confused by the contradiction. Why show mercy and then continue fighting? "You are going to lose," he told them. "The Empire has millions of soldiers. You are one planet." The human interrogating him smiled without humor. "We have 7 billion people. Every single one of us is willing to die to take you with us. Can your empire say the same?" The alien had no answer. In the Rocky Mountains, deep beneath a maze of tunnels and blast doors, General Hayes activated systems that had been dormant for decades. Cold War relics that were supposed to have been dismantled. Strategic weapons that nations had sworn never to use again. Humanity was about to break those promises. The countdown reached 0, and the real war began. The 72-hour deadline passed without human surrender. Tulvin gave the order and the bombardment began. Energy beams lanced down from orbit, targeting major cities. New York, Beijing, Mumbai, Cairo. The aliens would burn humanity's cultural centers until they begged for mercy. 3 ships fired simultaneously. The beams burned through atmosphere, heating the air to plasma as they descended toward their targets. Then, impossibly, the beams stopped, not deflected, not blocked, simply interrupted as something punched through the ships firing them. Alarm klaxons screamed across the Demarian fleet. 3 cruisers had been hit by projectiles moving at orbital velocities. Tungsten rods, dense and narrow, accelerated by electromagnetic rails buried in mountains across Earth's surface. The rods were not explosive. They did not need to be. Kinetic energy at those speeds turned anything into a devastating weapon. The rods punched through energy shields like they were paper, continuing through armor and interior bulkheads before exiting the far side of each ship. Atmosphere vented into space. Systems failed. Thousands of Demarian crew members died in seconds as their vessels broke apart. Tulvin watched in shock as ship debris rained down toward Earth. The humans had weapons that matched Demarian technology. Primitive humans who barely had a space program had built kinetic bombardment platforms and hidden them from orbital scans. How? The answer came quickly as more human weapons revealed themselves. Railguns fired continuously from hidden positions. Laser installations that had been disguised as radio telescope facilities began tracking and burning alien fighters out of the sky. Missile silos that intelligence had assured him were deactivated opened up, launching modified projectiles that used Demarian shield frequencies against them. "How did they know our shield modulation?" his tactical officer asked in panic. They had underestimated human signals intelligence. While the Demarians broadcast their surrender demands and communicated openly between ships, human listening posts had intercepted everything. Cryptographers had broken their encryption. Engineers had analyzed their technology. In 72 hours, Earth's best minds had dissected Demarian communications and found the weaknesses. The space battle intensified as human orbital platforms engaged the fleet directly. The platforms were crude compared to proper warships, just weapons mounted on reinforced frames, but there were hundreds of them. Space debris and decommissioned satellites had been weaponized. Everything humanity had put into orbit over decades of space exploration was now firing on the invaders. On the ground, the war turned even uglier. Chemical weapons that had been banned for a century came out of storage. Nerve agents modified to attack Demarian biology spread through occupied zones. The aliens had no defense against them. Their shields stopped energy and projectiles, not gas. Demarian soldiers died choking, their nervous systems shutting down as human-engineered toxins ravaged their bodies. Some compounds were so effective that a single canister could kill every alien in a square mile. The humans deployed them without hesitation. Dr. Petrov's biological weapons entered the battlefield next. Viruses designed in his laboratory spread through alien ranks like wildfire. The Demarians had no antibodies, no resistance. Their medical teams had no treatment protocols. Soldiers who survived human bullets and bombs fell to microscopic invaders they could not see or fight. Field hospitals overflowed with dying aliens. Their medics worked desperately to contain the outbreak, but the diseases spread faster than they could respond. Some strains were airborne, others transmitted through contact. A few could survive on surfaces for days, turning every occupied building into a biohazard zone. "Withdraw to the ships," Tulvin ordered. "Seal all ground forces in quarantine. Nothing returns to the fleet that might be contaminated." But it was too late. The diseases had already spread to the fleet through routine personnel transfers. Soon ships reported infections spreading through their ventilation systems. The Demarian military machine, so efficient at conquest, had no protocols for biological warfare on this scale. General Hayes watched the casualty reports with cold satisfaction. 40% of the invasion force was dead, dying, or combat ineffective. The orbital fleet was fragmenting as ships pulled back to avoid human weapons. Ground forces were requesting evacuation that would not come. She felt no joy in the deaths. Her family was still dead. 500 million humans had died in the initial bombardment and occupation, but she felt vindication. The aliens had thought humans were prey. They were learning otherwise. Human forces began their counteroffensive, not with coordinated military assaults, but with thousands of independent attacks across every occupied territory. Resistance cells struck simultaneously, overwhelming Demarian defenders who were already weakened by disease and chemical weapons. A Demarian stronghold in Australia fell when humans tunneled underneath it and detonated a fuel-air explosive that collapsed the entire facility. An alien command post in Brazil was overrun by fighters who had strapped explosives to their own bodies and walked into checkpoints. A forward operating base in Russia simply vanished when the humans triggered a controlled avalanche that buried it under 1,000,000 tons of snow and rock. The humans fought without regard for their own survival. They used tactics the Demarians had never encountered because no civilized species would employ them. Suicide attacks, human shields, attacking from civilian crowds, using their own cities as fortified positions, daring the aliens to destroy them. Demarian military doctrine had no answers. Their rules of engagement prohibited mass civilian casualties. Their tactical manuals assumed enemies would attempt to preserve their own populations. The humans violated every assumption the Empire had made about warfare. Young officer Velrin sat in his quarters, reviewing footage from the ground war. He watched human children carrying messages for resistance fighters. He watched elderly humans preparing improvised explosives. He watched an entire wedding party attack a Demarian patrol, the bride still in her white dress as she detonated a vest bomb. These were not soldiers. These were civilians who had become warriors because their world was invaded. Every human was a potential threat. Every building could be a trap. Every act of kindness might be a setup for an ambush. Velrin began to understand what his people had done wrong. They had invaded a world where death in battle was considered honorable, where sacrificing yourself to kill the enemy was praised, where entire cultural philosophies were built around the concept of righteous violence. The Demarians had conquered hundreds of worlds, but they had never fought humans before. The invasion was not proceeding according to plan. Week 2 of the invasion marked the point where everything changed. The Demarian Empire held 847 worlds, but they were losing their 848th. Tulvin transmitted status reports to the High Command that read like disaster assessments rather than conquest updates. 43% casualties, 21 ships destroyed or disabled, ground forces requesting immediate evacuation, biological contamination spreading through the fleet, morale collapsing, local resistance growing stronger. The report concluded with a recommendation that had never appeared in any previous conquest: strategic withdrawal. The response from High Command was immediate and absolute. No withdrawal. Annihilate the planet. Make an example that would prevent other subject species from attempting resistance. Turn Earth into a monument to the cost of defying the Empire. Tulvin read the orders with growing dread. Planet-killing weapons would be deployed. Earth would burn. But he knew what his superiors did not. Making martyrs of humans would not terrify the Empire's subjects. It would inspire them. Already, reports filtered in from across Demarian space. Subject species on conquered worlds were watching the Earth conflict through captured transmissions. They saw humans fighting ships with rocks and bullets. They saw a primitive species making the mighty Empire bleed. If Earth fell but fell fighting, those watching species would remember. They would start to believe that resistance was possible. The political situation within the Empire itself was deteriorating. Client species crews on Demarian vessels were requesting transfers or simply deserting. Some had even sabotaged their own ships rather than participate in the Earth operation. The client species soldiers who had been conscripted to fight for the Empire were refusing orders. A mutiny erupted on one of the assault carriers. An entire deck of conscripted alien troops turned on their Demarian officers, killed them, and broadcast a message to Earth offering to defect. General Hayes responded immediately, sending instructions on how to safely approach human-controlled space without being fired upon. The defecting ship limped into orbit over Australia, damaged by Demarian pursuit craft, but still functional. Human forces boarded cautiously, weapons ready, and found 300 alien soldiers who wanted to fight against the Empire that had enslaved their worlds. Hayes studied them carefully. Different species, different homeworlds, all united by hatred of Demarian rule. She made a decision that would reshape the entire conflict. "We accept your surrender," she told them, "and we offer you a choice. Return to your homeworlds as freed prisoners, or join us in liberating the galaxy from the Empire." 273 of them chose to fight. Human engineers swarmed over the captured ship, studying its systems with desperate intensity. They had partial access to Demarian technology from crashed vessels and captured equipment, but this was the first intact warship. Within days, they understood enough to begin modifications. The fusion drives were more efficient than anything Earth had developed. The shield generators could be reverse-engineered. The weapons systems used principles that human physics had theorized but never successfully implemented. Most importantly, the faster-than-light drive gave humanity access to the galaxy. Dr. Petrov worked with defected alien scientists to understand Demarian biology more completely. Together, they refined the bioweapons, making them more lethal and more contagious. The moral weight of creating planet-killing diseases pressed down on him, but he continued. Every day the war continued, more humans died. He would end it faster. On Earth's surface, the counteroffensive intensified. Human forces had learned to fight in the ruins of their own cities, using rubble and destruction to their advantage. They laid traps in collapsed buildings. They struck from tunnels and sewers. They used burned-out vehicles as cover and destroyed bridges to limit alien mobility. Demarian soldiers, weakened by disease and chemical exposure, faced human fighters who knew every street and building. The aliens had superior weapons and armor, but it meant nothing when a sniper's bullet found the gap between helmet and chest plate. It meant nothing when the building they sheltered in collapsed on top of them. The humans developed new tactics specifically to counter Demarian advantages. They used mirrors and reflective surfaces to confuse alien targeting systems. They generated electromagnetic interference that disrupted communications. They even trained birds to drop small explosives on hovering alien craft, turning Earth's own wildlife into weapons. Velrin watched the war devolve into nightmare and made a decision. He gathered intelligence files, tactical data, fleet positions, and command codes. Then he stole a shuttle and defected to the humans. He was shot down over what used to be Paris. Human resistance fighters pulled him from the wreckage, ready to execute him, until he transmitted his data package on all frequencies. Terabytes of information about the Demarian military, everything he knew freely given. General Hayes interrogated him personally. Why betray your own species? Because this is genocide, Velrin said. My people came here to conquer, but what we are doing now is extermination. I cannot be part of it. I will not. Hayes studied him for a long moment. You understand we are going to use this information to kill more of your people. I understand, but perhaps if we help you win quickly, fewer will die on both sides. The intelligence Velrin provided changed everything. Hayes now knew the positions of every Demarian ship, the status of their shields and weapons, the locations of their fuel depots and supply lines. She knew which officers were loyal and which were questioning their orders. She knew where the Empire was vulnerable. Within hours, human forces launched coordinated strikes against Demarian supply lines, captured alien weapons fired on Demarian logistics vessels. The invasion fleet, already weakened, now faced starvation and ammunition shortages. Tulvin received reports of attacks he could not defend against. The humans knew too much. Someone had betrayed the Empire, and that betrayal was costing them the war. On day 16 of the invasion, the first Demarian ship retreated from Earth orbit without orders. Then another. Then 5 more. The fleet was breaking apart as individual commanders made the decision to save their crews rather than follow suicidal orders from high command. The humans had won the battle for Earth. Now they were going to take the war to the Empire. 3 weeks after the invasion began, no Demarian soldier remained alive on Earth's surface. The orbital fleet had pulled back to a distant defensive position, maintaining a blockade but refusing to engage. They had lost too many ships, too many soldiers, too much pride. Now they waited for reinforcements that might never come. General Hayes stood on the bridge of the captured Demarian flagship that her forces had renamed Retribution. Human crew members worked alongside defected aliens at control stations, learning to operate technology that should have been decades beyond their understanding. But humans learned fast, especially when survival depended on it. Jump drive is ready, the navigation officer reported. She was 23 years old and had been studying astrophysics before the invasion. Now she was calculating faster-than-light trajectories. Target the nearest Demarian supply depot, Hayes ordered. We are taking the fight to them. The ship folded space and vanished from Earth orbit. When it emerged 3 light-years away, the crew found themselves looking at a massive space station orbiting a barren moon. Demarian supply ships moved in orderly patterns, loading and unloading cargo, completely unprepared for attack. Retribution opened fire. Human-modified weapons tore through the station's shields. Explosions blossomed in the void as fuel reserves detonated. Supply ships scrambled to escape, but the humans had learned Demarian tactics. They targeted the drives first, crippling the vessels before destroying them. Within 20 minutes, the supply depot was gone. Thousands of tons of ammunition, fuel, and equipment meant for the Earth invasion fleet now floated as debris. The humans jumped away before reinforcements could arrive, leaving only destruction behind. They hit 3 more supply lines in the next week. Each attack was faster, more efficient, more brutal. The Demarian logistics network began to collapse as commanders rerouted shipments through safer corridors, which only created new bottlenecks and delays. But the real damage was psychological. Word spread through the Empire that humans were no longer defending. They were hunting. A primitive species that should have been crushed was now conducting offensive operations in Demarian space. The implications were staggering. On conquered worlds across the Empire, subject species began to whisper. If humans could resist, maybe they could too. Small acts of defiance multiplied into organized resistance. Equipment malfunctioned mysteriously. Production quotas were not met. Demarian administrators found themselves facing non-cooperation on a massive scale. The first open rebellion erupted on a mining colony in the outer sectors. The workers, seeing humans fight successfully, simply stopped working. When Demarian security forces arrived to restore order, they found the entire population armed with mining equipment turned into weapons. The rebellion was crushed, but it took 3 days and killed more Demarians than had died in the initial invasion of that world. Tulvin watched his empire fracture in real time. Status reports flooded in from across controlled space. Rebellions here, resistance movements there, defections everywhere. The humans had done more than defend their world. They had shown the entire galaxy that the Empire could be beaten. Dr. Petrov stood in the laboratory he had set up aboard one of the captured ships. Around him, human and alien scientists worked together on projects that would have been unimaginable a month ago. They were combining Earth biology with alien technology, creating hybrid weapons systems that terrified even their creators. "We should destroy this research," one of his assistants said, staring at a bioweapon that could sterilize an entire planet. "No," Petrov said quietly, "we keep it. We make sure the Empire knows we have it. Deterrence only works if the threat is real." He had lost his humanity somewhere in the smoking ruins of his old laboratory, buried under the city where his family had died. What remained was a cold calculation. Make the weapons terrible enough, and maybe they would never need to be used. Hayes received a transmission from Earth. The governments had unified into a single war council and promoted her to supreme commander of all human forces. She accepted without ceremony. Titles meant nothing. Results were all that mattered. Her next operation was more ambitious. Intelligence from Velrin indicated a Demarian colony world that had a significant human sympathizer population among its workers. The world produced industrial equipment for the Empire's expansion. Hayes planned to liberate it. The human fleet, now numbering 30 captured and modified ships, jumped into the system. They broadcast a message on all frequencies in the local language. "We are humanity. We come to offer freedom. Stand down and you will not be harmed. Resist and we will show you what Earth learned from your empire." The Demarian garrison chose to resist. It was a mistake. Human forces deployed everything they had learned from defending Earth. Kinetic bombardment from orbit, biological weapons, chemical agents, psychological warfare. The garrison fell in 18 hours. The colonists, seeing their oppressors destroyed, welcomed the humans as liberators. Hayes addressed the freed population personally. "The Empire enslaved you. We offer you a choice. Join us in freeing the galaxy or remain neutral and be protected. But know this, we will destroy every Demarian military force we encounter. Stand with us or stand aside." 15,000 former slaves volunteered to fight. Hayes had her army. The liberation campaign spread across 3 sectors. Each freed world added soldiers, ships, and resources to the growing coalition. Humans shared their weapons technology freely with any species willing to fight the Empire. The defensive war for Earth had become a revolutionary war for galactic freedom. Demarian High Command faced a crisis they had never imagined. Multiple sectors in open rebellion. Supply lines cut. Fleet elements defecting or refusing orders. The Empire's military advantage was dissolving as conquered species acquired human weapons and tactics. Tulvin received orders to abandon Earth entirely and return to defend the core worlds. The invasion had failed. Worse, it had triggered the collapse of the Empire itself. He prepared his remaining ships for the retreat, knowing that he would face a court-martial for his failure. But as his fleet prepared to jump, a new human transmission reached him. General Hayes appeared on screen, standing on the bridge of his former flagship. "Run back to your homeworld," she said. "Tell your Empress what happened here. Tell her that humanity is coming. Tell her that every species you enslaved is coming with us. and tell her that we will give her the same choice you gave Earth: surrender or burn." The transmission ended. Tulvin gave the order to retreat, and his invasion force fled. 8 months passed between the failed invasion of Earth and the arrival of human forces at the edge of the Demarian home system. In that time, the galaxy had transformed. 200 formerly conquered worlds had declared independence. The Demarian Empire, which had stood for 3,000 years, controlled less than half its former territory. The human fleet that emerged from jump space was not impressive by galactic standards. 70 ships, all captured or retrofitted Demarian vessels, many showing battle damage hastily repaired. But what made the fleet terrifying was not its size or power. It was the flags painted on every hull. Earth, 40 different liberated worlds, species that had been enemies for generations, now united under human leadership against their former masters. General Hayes, now gray-haired and carrying the weight of 8 months of constant warfare, stood on the bridge of retribution and looked at the Demarian homeworld. It was beautiful. Blue oceans, green continents, white clouds. It looked like Earth. "They have 300 ships defending the planet," her tactical officer reported. "We are outnumbered 4-1. Hayes nodded. Numbers had not mattered at Earth either. Begin the operation. The human strategy was not to win a fleet engagement. It was to break Demarian will to fight. The attacking ships spread out, each one broadcasting footage from the invasion of Earth. Demarian civilians watching from their homeworld saw their military burning human cities. They saw occupation forces executing prisoners. They saw the atrocities their empire had committed in their name. Then they saw the response. Humans fighting back with weapons that should not have worked. Humans turning Demarian technology against its creators. Humans refusing to surrender even when defeat seemed certain. The broadcast showed the cost too. 500 million human dead, cities in ruins, a planet scarred by war. The message was clear. This is what you did. This is what it cost us. Now we are here to collect payment. The Demarian home fleet engaged, and the battle began. Ships exchanged fire at ranges where human sensors could barely track the targets. Energy beams and kinetic rounds filled the space between fleets. Ships on both sides exploded, venting atmosphere and crew into the void. But the humans had learned from every battle they had fought. Their tactics were not Demarian military doctrine. They were human improvisation mixed with 800 years of alien combat experience from their defected allies. They used suicide runs. They rammed disabled ships into active ones. They deployed clouds of debris to confuse sensors and then struck from unexpected angles. Most importantly, they deployed Dr. Petrov's final weapon, missiles containing biological agents specifically engineered to target Demarian physiology. The warheads did not explode. They simply released their payload into space, where it would be drawn into ship ventilation systems. Within hours, crew members on Demarian vessels began falling ill. The disease spread faster than their medical teams could respond, jumping from ship to ship through routine communications and supply transfers. Captains ordered full quarantine, but it was too late. The plague was loose in the fleet. Ships began to break formation as medical emergencies overwhelmed their ability to fight. Crews evacuated to shuttles and escape pods, abandoning vessels that could no longer be operated safely. The Demarian defensive line collapsed not through superior firepower, but through biological warfare. On the planet's surface, the Empress of the Demarian Empire watched her homeworld's defense crumble. She was ancient by human standards, having ruled for 400 years. She had overseen the conquest of hundreds of worlds. She had built an empire that spanned light years. And now a species that had barely discovered faster-than-light travel was destroying it all. Her military advisors recommended immediate surrender. Her intelligence services showed rebel forces approaching from every direction. Her economy was collapsing as trade routes closed and production halted. The empire was finished. She authorized a planetary broadcast on all frequencies. To the forces of humanity and their allies, the Demarian Empire surrenders unconditionally. We request terms. Hayes received the transmission and felt nothing. No triumph, no satisfaction, just exhaustion. She had spent 8 months killing, watching her people die, making decisions that cost lives by the millions. The surrender was not a victory. It was just the end of the killing. "Transmit our terms," she ordered. The demands were absolute. Complete disarmament of all Demarian military forces, dissolution of the empire, war crimes trials for the invasion leadership, reparations to Earth and all liberated worlds. Demarian population relocated to 3 colony worlds under coalition supervision. And finally, the homeworld itself would become the seat of a new galactic government representing all free species. The Empress accepted every term. She had no choice. The alternative was planetary bombardment and the extinction of her entire species. At least this way, Demarians would survive. Tulvin stood in the War Crimes Tribunal facing judges from 20 different species. He listened to the charges: invasion of a sovereign world, mass murder of civilians, deployment of weapons of mass destruction, crimes against sapient life. The list continued for hours. He did not defend himself. He had given the orders. He had led the invasion. He had believed that humanity would surrender rather than face destruction. He had been catastrophically wrong. "I accept responsibility," he said when finally given a chance to speak. "I ordered the attack on Earth. The deaths that followed are my burden to carry." The judges sentenced him to life imprisonment. He would spend his remaining centuries in a cell, living with the knowledge that his arrogance had destroyed an empire. Dr. Petrov retired to a research station on one of the liberated worlds. He destroyed all his bioweapon research, every sample, every formula, every note. The knowledge died with him when he passed away 5 years later. Some weapons, he had decided, should never exist. Velrin became the Demarian ambassador to the new Galactic Federation. He worked tirelessly to preserve what remained of his culture while ensuring it would never again threaten others. It was hard, thankless work, but it was necessary. 10 years after the invasion, children in schools across the galaxy learned about the Earth War. They learned how the Demarian Empire fell. They learned about the cost of arrogance and the price of freedom. They learned that conquest could never truly succeed if the conquered refused to accept defeat. General Hayes, now elderly and scarred by war, visited the memorial built on the ruins of her home city. 500 million names carved in stone. Her family's names were there, along with every other human who died in the invasion. A young child approached her, part of the new generation born after the war. "Are you really General Hayes, the one who defeated the Empire?" Hayes looked at the child and felt the weight of everything she had done. "I am the one who did what was necessary, but defeating the Empire was not about me. It was about every human who refused to surrender, every soldier who fought, every civilian who resisted. We won because we would rather die free than live enslaved." The child considered this seriously. "My teacher says we should forgive the Demarians. That revenge just makes more war." "Your teacher is wise," Hayes said. "We fought because we had to. We showed mercy when we could have destroyed them completely because that is what separates us from what they were. Remember both lessons." She placed her hand on the memorial stone, feeling the names carved there. So many dead, so much pain, but Earth was free. The galaxy was free. The price had been terrible, but the alternative would have been worse. Above them, ships from 100 different worlds moved through the sky, bound together in an alliance forged in the fires of resistance. The Demarian Empire was gone. In its place stood a federation of equals, built on the principle that no species should ever again bow to another. Humanity had not set out to liberate the galaxy. They had only wanted to survive. But in surviving, they had shown every oppressed species in known space that resistance was possible, that freedom was worth fighting for, that empires could fall. The child asked one more question: will there be more wars? Hayes looked at the future and gave the only honest answer she could. Probably. But maybe, if we remember what this one cost, we can make them less terrible. That is all any of us can do. She walked away from the memorial, leaving the names behind but carrying their memory forward. The war was over. The healing would take generations. But for the first time in 847 conquered worlds, the galaxy knew peace that was not imposed by force. It had only taken the near extinction of humanity to achieve it.